evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
Welcome to another episode of Mahoning Drive-In Radio. Mark here, General Manager at the Mahoning Drive-In Theater and huge super fan of the subject we're about to talk about today. My guest is Thom Shubilla, author of PRIMETIME 1966 to 1967, the full spectrum of television's first all-color season, which is a fascinating book that is about, well, what it says it's about. It's about all the TV shows that were on network TV in America on that first year that all the shows were in color. And one of them is the show, the band, the phenomenon we're going to talk about today, and that's the Monkees. We are doing, if you haven't heard, on August 14th, Mahoning Monkee Mania. This is a one-night-only Sunday night show dedicated to celebrating the Monkees on film. We have really rare 35 millimeter episodes of 2 episodes of the show. We have the Monkees feature film Head and other additional surprises as we go along, including our guest, Thom. So Thom, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you. Thank you for having me back. I had a blast last time, and last time I was at the drive-in for Batman, I may have spoiled it. I said pre-show talk up. I said, we have to get the Monkees movie. We have to show Head. And a couple days later, it was announced, and I said, "Oh boy, I hope I didn't spoil anything."
No, this was a show that we've been working on for a long time. It's one that is very close to my heart. I'm the organizer of this event, so all the details minus the amazing graphics that you see were mine on this one. And I've wanted to bring Head to our screen for a long time, as has Virgil. And one day, about a year or so ago, he half joked about showing Head on the big screen, and I said, "Buddy, if you say this is real, I'm going to make this the best show it can be." And knew that there were in existence these 35 millimeter prints from a couple of sources of the episodes as they aired in the 1973 ABC reruns, which meant they sometimes had some different songs in them than they did when you originally saw them.
Yeah, they had some different songs, and they had some different, there was a couple different things in it, yeah.
Yeah, so these are versions that people might never have seen. So anyway, August 14th, this is happening, and it was in the works for a long time. We were really just waiting on confirmation that we could get the 35 millimeter print of Head, because it was sort of tricky to locate and all that, but everything is going to be on film as we do.
So when you have to locate these, the 35 for the Mahoning, I mean, is it often like a difficult task to track some of these movies down? Because I'm sure some movies, there's a lot of prints, and then some movies it's nowhere. Because I was thinking about that about Batman. I was thinking, I can't imagine there's a lot of prints of this around.
That Batman print happened to have been, and wait for the magic year, 1989 restrike.
Oh,
when the Tim Burton Batman came out, and film was still, film was still the law of the theater at that point. Fox very wisely struck a new print so they could get some repertory action out of that. That's why that print looked so good.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It wasn't an original from the 60s. It's a mix. Some things we just contact the studio. They said, "Yep, we'll send it to you." Sometimes movies that are more recent than you would think and more popular than you would realize are not available. Like some really big classics from what I think of as, of course I do the math, it's 30 years ago, but from like the 90s, they're like, nope, no print. So you have to then go to
no prints of that.
Some collectors like Exhumed Films that we know. Sometimes an archive will have them. There is an online discussion group for film programmers where sometimes people will just throw a query out as to who has the rights for this prints, and you can find it that way. But
that's incredible, because like I said, I'm sure Head is something that, isn't.
I saw it on film. It was a funny day. This was in the sometime in the late 90s. I went to Boston to see Jerry Lewis in the touring production of Damn Yankees, which was a mega thrill. But right before that, we went to the Brattle Theater that was doing a double feature of Head and Repo Man on 35. So
okay.
I went and saw Head, which I never thought I would get to see in a theater. And then I rushed over across town to go see Jerry Lewis in person. So that was
and Jerry Lewis, that tour was still using the headshot that he's been using for 30 years. I've seen the booklet on that.
Right. And at one point he stopped the show and basically just did his live act. Like he's this character throughout the show. He does the thing with the batons, or he did the thing with the batons and telling dirty jokes. And it was wonderful.
Oh, that's incredible.
So yeah, Head, I had heard that there was a print of Head. It's screened here and there around the country over the years. And I had heard that Rhino, who owns the rights to the Monkees, had a print. So
yeah.
I don't know when it was struck. I'm going to guess it was probably struck in the 90s, probably the same one that I saw back then.
Right.
Probably around the time they made the DVD for it.
Yeah, or maybe it's an 80s print when they made the MTV return.
There may be a way for us to tell when we get it, but as of this point, I'm not quite sure. I know it's screened in the past, and from what I've heard, it looks, I remember it looking like a new print when I saw it. But again, I do the math, and that was like 30 years ago. So we'll see how it goes. So let's roll it on back. Madness. 4 Insane Boys Wanted. Let's talk about how this whole thing came together, because as Mickey Dolenz is fond of saying in most interviews, the Monkees was a TV show about a rock and roll group. They weren't a band that met as kids and then got a TV deal.
Yeah, you're right. They had that original original ad in Variety looking for young men who wanted to be on this TV show. And yeah, you're right. It's a TV show about a band that they didn't meet beforehand. They didn't know each other beforehand. And Mickey Dolenz really was the only one that, had a whole lot of TV credits. He was on a show, Circus Boy, as a child. So he's a child star. And Davy Jones, did have a minor hit. And he actually was on the Ed Sullivan Show the same day the Beatles debuted in America. He was in Oliver. He played the Artful Dodger on Oliver. And music talent, that was kind of second. The first was, are these guys funny? Are they good looking? And can they look like a band?
Right. And Davy Jones he was under contract to Screen Gems at that time. His solo album that came out the year before the Monkees, David Jones, was on the Colpix label, which eventually morphed into Cold Gems, which was the Monkees label.
Cold Gems.
And I've seen bits and pieces here and there of some like pre-Monkees TV work he did. He was in an episode of The Farmer's Daughter where he played like a long-haired singing kid rock and roller, I guess. And he did like this different early version pre-Monkees of I'm Gonna Buy Me a Dog, which is kind of wild to see. And he was like in a bed. Like he had some like Columbia Pictures TV work as a guest. They were trying to turn him into another teen idol. Yeah. And it's been said that, or he had said later on that the Monkees were like, he already had a slot on that Monkee show. Like they were looking for a vehicle to put him in. So he was kind of a shoe-in for it.
Yeah. And Peter Tork, seemingly, was a musician, but, again, music talent seemed to be kind of that was second.
And part of it too is, have the ability to look convincing when you were miming to the recordings in the performance sections. Tork has told this story. I keep referring to these guys, sadly, in the present tense. 3/4 are no longer with us. But Peter Tork would often say he showed up at one of the first recording sessions with a guitar in his hand, and one of the people who were running the show there were like, "What are you doing with that? The music's already done. You guys are here to sing on it." And part of it was that their filming schedule was so nonstop, long days, and then they would go into the studio to record well into the wee hours of the night, that they just didn't have time for these guys to like learn how to play as a group and sound good on records. And it was not uncommon in that era. It's come out more and more that the session musicians that were on the majority of the Monkee songs in the beginning were the same people who played on the Mamas and the Papas records and the Beach Boys records, like Gary Lewis and the Playboys.
Yeah, the Wrecking Crew is what they were kind of known as.
There's an interview with Hal Blaine somewhere where he was like, I was the drummer for the Monkees. I was the drummer for the Partridge Family. And he lists like every band you've heard of. Because the bands, like they would go out and play live. They were existing groups, but if they wanted their records to be hits and sound perfect, they brought in the best people to do that. So that's why you had like a Glenn Campbell playing on Monkees records, and the people who wrote the Monkee records were the best songwriters of the era.
And in a time before Pro Tools and things like that, where you could just kind of insert where the drums where you want them, this was the next best thing.
It was the best, most dependable and efficient musicians that existed at the time on all these records. They got a lot of criticism at the time for not playing on their own records or not playing their own instruments, but I mean, they played live well into that first year, they were doing live shows. I mean, it's referred to as they sounded like, a good garage band, but it was them on stage when they toured. Nesmith used to say, I think in one of the episodes, he's like, I'm about to go out there in front of 20,000 people. If I don't play my own instruments, I'm in a lot of trouble right now. But anyway, so they had these open auditions. It was like a publicity cattle call for these 4 guys. And if you look at the Blu-rays, if you can afford it and found it, the Blu-ray set of the Monkees TV series, they have a lot of these original screen tests. And I think some are on YouTube. And you see the various other people who are auditioning in these various combinations. And it's like Mickey Rooney's son was one of them. And some of the guys that went on to be like Bill Chadwick, who went on to be a songwriter for the Monkees. He's a friend of Nesmith. He was part of like that whole thing. A lot of the guys who weren't hired, or 4 of them, wound up being like their stand-ins and roadies and all that kind of stuff. And you see some of those guys, but it's wild to see these foursomes that include like Mike Nesmith and 3 other guys, or Mickey and Peter. And
I know. Stephen Stills was certainly one of the guys that auditioned. Stephen Stills was one of them. I forget the others. There was a couple of other famous names. I can't think of them off the top of my head. But you do know the big urban legend,
which is not true.
Which is not true. Charles Manson did not audition for the Monkees. I started doing the math when I first heard it. I went, okay, that sounds plausible. And then I'm going, he would have been like 37. That's way too old to be in the Monkees.
The research, because that had gone around for years. And apparently he was in jail at the time that those auditions happened. So it just wasn't possible.
As much of his adult life, but...
So they had these auditions, and they settled on these 4 guys, and it's like, hey, you're a band now. And what was so unique at that time was that they used their own names, first and last, which was kind of unheard of in TV, other than, that other TV rock and roller, Ricky Nelson. Most of the time you're playing a character, and they were sort of playing characters based on their own personalities to a degree. But it was hard for people to separate fantasy from reality when it's called the Monkees. We see them on TV. We're seeing them live. We're buying their records. It's their name.
We're seeing the real names. Yeah.
Right.
And that became, with my book, it became really difficult for me to separate. Well, wait, where does the TV show end and the band begin and the real people begin? And I had to almost include all of the Monkees' history in the book, because all of it's part of the TV show and all of it reverts back to the TV show. It's I didn't have to give, say, Peter Graves on Mission Impossible. Once he stopped being the head of the IMF on Mission Impossible, once Don Adams stopped being Maxwell Smart, he was no longer Maxwell Smart. But the Monkees, it's kind of this whole universe. It's this whole meta universe, I guess.
Mickey Dolenz has always been really reluctant to refer to them as a band. It's more like a review, he said, where every time they do a tour, it's those guys on stage and they're all playing instruments with other musicians to, back them or accompany them. But it's hard to say that's not a band, like I paid a lot of money to go see these guys live, and it was them playing and singing. How is that not a band?
And it's not like the Archies, which aren't really a band. They're a cartoon. There's studio musicians, and so that you get into a whole argument on that too. So.
The Partridge Family, which was seemingly sort of the same deal, but those were people who played characters, and it wasn't them playing on the records aside from Cassidy and Shirley Jones singing. And if there was a live show, it was David Cassidy going out live. It wasn't Keith Partridge going out live. So there was that separation of fantasy and reality. But with the Monkees, there never was. And for so many people, for a lot of people, it's their favorite band. And some people laugh, but it's like, the music's good and it's music and you can buy records and people are still buying it. So people refer to it as like a Pinocchio thing. Pinocchio became a real boy, and the Monkees went from this fictional TV show to a real band simultaneously and have lingered for, sadly, again, there's only one left alive, but
and the TV, here's the other thing. The TV show is really good.
It's it's
funny. It's a genuinely funny show. If you watch the Monkee show, if you've never watched it before, it's like genuinely funny. You're sitting there laughing, and kind of a timeless humor. It's kind of incredible.
I first became a Monkees fan as a little kid, like 4 or 5 years old, seeing the reruns on the WLVI Channel 56 out of Boston. This would have been like 78, 79, somewhere around there. I actually got kindergarten once. My parents were away. I had a babysitter and I feigned illness because I didn't want to miss the Monkees episode that was on that day, because it was on during the period of time I was on in kindergarten. And like they sang "We May Be Coming to Your Town" when I used to go downtown to shop with my parents as a kid. I was looking for the Monkee Mobile. It's going to be here. And then when they came back in '86, when MTV had that marathon, and I was like, oh yeah, I used to watch that show. That show, I remember it being fun. And I watched it and I was like, oh my God, this show is speaking, be it 20 years old, is speaking directly to my sensibility. It's so sharp and fourth wall breaking and unlike anything that had been done on TV at that point. You watch it now, it still seems ahead of its time. It seems ahead of this time. People forget that it's really funny and really, I'd say edgy. It's not really like controversial edgy, but some of the stuff that it does was just so unconventional for TV at that time that it still holds up really well.
I don't think it's one of those shows that if you pitched the basic concept of it today, it may get picked up or something like that. But just how the shows kind of were run, they'd say no, like a test audience would not pick this up. A test audience would just, no, this is too wacky. Like this is just too, unconventional. We don't think we could sell this. And thankfully it came on at a time where they would possibly greenlight something like that.
Well, that's the season you're talking about. I think back about that era, and there was so much just like insane concepts on TV.
Yeah,
the guy's got a gene.
We're just going to try it. And
there were so many, it was predominantly the sitcoms, but the concepts were just like nuts. That so much so that they, in an era that was earlier or later, they probably wouldn't have lasted, but something about that sweet spot of 66 to 67, you had just like, and that's why I think it was so attractive to so many of us who didn't live through that period, but caught those shows in syndication in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, so different than what we had. Yeah.
That, and it appeals to the imagination of a child. There's a guy and he talks to he's got a phone in his shoe, or it's a family of monsters or whatever. I mean,
I still want my shoe phone, let me tell you.
So let's talk about the initial launch of the Monkees, because that happened in this period. It went 2 seasons, 66 to 68. And the 66, 67 is exactly what your book is about. So lay some knowledge on me on what you dug up in writing. So really in the book, we when I looked at it again, that first season and we talked about, you mentioned a little bit earlier, it was part of Screen Gems, and then the Cold Gems put out the records. And that was a part of a larger, part of Columbia Pictures. It was, under the larger umbrella of Columbia Pictures. And the TV show, although it was popular, it wasn't a top 30 show. It wasn't a huge rating success, but it sold records. So for everybody, for the network, for Columbia Pictures, for Screen Gems, for Cold Gems, as long as people were buying the records, that's really all they cared about. So really, I mean, that first season and second season were not a terrible rating success. And so that's one of the things that I really did look at on there. And one of the other cool things that I did find was, and I may have mentioned this the last time we talked, is that, again, 1966 is the first season that every show was in color, and the Monkees obviously were in color. But at the time, only, I think about 9 to 10% of all households had a color television. So the vast majority of people were still watching this show in black and white. And they really formatted the show to also work in black and white. I've never watched the Monkees in black and white, but that's actually something I should try out to see how that would actually look. That's interesting, because I think about that and I think about Batman 66, and I can't conceive of how much duller in my brain they would be in black and white. I've never seen black and white, and the Monkees was always a very colorful show to my eye.
Colorful show, yeah. But they made a good point of making sure that it looked good in black and white. And again, a lot of this was future proofing the show, saying, okay, this is going to look good in color, this is going to look good in black and white.
I think I remember hearing from British Monkees fans who were first generation, as they say, who British TV hadn't switched over to color by the time that first season came out. That's how they experienced the show for the first time. And it seems like color's almost an element to how much fun the show was. Like you think about the Rainbow Room, they would shoot those segments in and the red shirts and all that stuff. That it'll be interesting one day. I'll have to do that. Turn the color down and see how a favorite episode.
Turn the color on the TV. I was on a podcast with an Australian fan of the Monkees.
Yes, I saw that.
He was Australian, and they didn't get color TV until the 70s in Australia. And again, he talked about how his mind was absolutely blown by seeing it for the first time. And even though it was in black and white, he didn't care. It was all of a sudden, he heard it for the first time, and all of a sudden, the Monkees were his favorite band. So, I guess it's just a matter of perception with that.
I think the monstrous Monkey Mash episode, which might be my favorite episode, would be an excellent one.
Yes, me too.
Because you've got the Frankenstein, the Dracula, the Wolfman in that.
Yes, you have the cool classic monsters with that. Yes, that would be cool. That would be cool in black and white. I'm going to try that as well. The show only lasted 2 seasons, and really that second season, if you go and rewatch it, it's a lot of recycled material. It's a lot of recycled stuff. They seem to be just kind of going through the motions of that second season. And I think the guys were even almost tired of it and just wanted to get on with things by 68.
I think they were feeling the success and they wanted to spread their wings a bit more. They did it with the records.
Yeah.
They wrested control away from Don Kirshner of who had been the guy who said, here's your next hit. Here's your next song. Here's the track. Just sing to it. And they did the Headquarters album, which was all them with a couple of other musicians, which it satisfied, it scratched that itch. But then after that, they kind of pretty much went back to the way they were doing it before, but they were more in control of a lot of the.
Yeah, they went right back to, which was kind of interesting. They went back to Boyce and Hart, who wrote the largest number of their songs. Just went right back to said, all right, you know what? We need we need kind of Boyce and Hart to kind of back us up here a little bit. But yeah, they did wrestle control from Don Kirshner. And I think actually it was kind of Cold Gems also started getting frustrated with them. He started putting out stuff without their permission. And I think the Monkees kind of also started getting frustrated with them. So that became a thing. And then so he was replaced by Chip Douglas of the Turtles,
who produced Headquarters and Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones, which I think is my favorite of their albums. See, I feel like the guys, like there's the infamous Peter Tork Ladies Baby sessions where he recorded spent a lot of money and a lot of time trying to get this song perfect that wound up never getting released. I think they wanted to take advantage of their success and be more, overall entertainers or do their own thing. But the constrictions of what they had to be for the Monkees wasn't working for them. Nesmith wanted to do his country rock thing. Davey wanted to do his Broadway rock thing. And I had heard that they really wanted a third season, if it happened, to be more like Laugh-In, where they had guest stars. And you see a little bit of that in the second season, where they bring in Frank Zappa and Charlie Smalls and Tim Buckley and things like that. I think they wanted it to be more whatever they were into for a third season, but it wasn't to be.
Yeah, and that's certainly Head, where they start having some guest appearances and things like that. And then also in 33 to third revolutions per monkey, certainly that's what they wanted.
Yeah, that was sort of the nail in the coffin for the original foursome. This bizarre. It kind of covers the same ground thematically that Head does, only in a much less accessible way. I think maybe, I don't know.
Yeah,
you've got the rock and roll stars. That great moment where you've got this tower of pianos with Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, Fats Domino, I believe, if that was everybody on it.
Yes.
And it's got some very entertaining moments, but then it has these strange, interpretive dance sequences that go on forever and just odd stuff. And it aired opposite the Oscars, like NBC. They were contracted to do, I think, 3 specials, and that aired and it tanked hard in the ratings because it was on opposite the Oscars. And then Peter Tork left the group.
And that seems to be a beloved thing now, too. Where, much like Head, where at the time people were going, I don't know if I like this, and seemingly now much more beloved.
I've met people who their entry into the world of the Monkees was through Head or through 33 and a third, and they're just fans of those things because they're these strange, counterculture time capsules that they are, and they're so different from the TV series. Like anybody who went to see Head, who was still a Monkees fan, who just seen that second season wrap up and said, "Oh my God, it's going to be them on the big screen. It's going to be a 2-hour episode." We're pretty sorely disappointed and confused. It's so not that.
And also, I think with Head, and kind of going into that more, I rewatched it the other night, and I hadn't watched it in a little while. And I thought, I'll watch Head and do a refresher course for the podcast and everything. And the one thing that I don't know if I really just maybe didn't pick up on it before was they didn't use any earlier music. They didn't use the Monkees theme song in it, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I just never really noticed it, that, Hey, Hey, We're the Monkees was not in the Monkees movie.
No, and it doesn't necessarily have that upbeat tone all the way through. Like, I mean, the movie,
right.
Not to give anything away, but the movie opens with them all jumping off a bridge, and it ain't funny the way it happens in the movie. And it leads into this song that's kind of a melancholy song.
The Porpoise song, which actually is a really cool song. I really like that song, and certainly much more of a Beatles vibe to it, I think, kind of. And actually, it was the last highest rated. Went to 62 on the Billboard charts. So, and actually, they wouldn't have a song higher than that afterwards. So,
yeah, I think that it's often said that without that weekly TV series to keep pushing the music, they just sort of they carried on for another year or two after Head. Officially, they ended in 1970, and they put out albums. And the Saturday, we get back to those Saturday morning reruns that we're going to show on 35. Every time a Monkees episode was rerun, you had the 66 season. When they reran them in 67, they would put newer songs where they could insert them that were on whatever the current single or album were. And when they went into reruns, you had songs off their later albums. You had a song off their final album, Changes, dubbed onto some episodes that did work their way into syndication too, where you had the song Midnight Train put into one of the first season episodes from 4 years earlier.
And the Porpoise song, for me, actually my first introduction to it was on one of the Nuggets compilations. It was on a later Nuggets compilation from Rhino. I think it was like Psychedelic Pop Hits or something like that. I don't think I remember it from the Monkees movie, because I don't really remember particular songs from it, because, again, I think I probably watched it for the first time in high school, and I wasn't really familiar with kind of that post-television Monkees music. And it's a really cool song, kind of really channeling some psychedelic stuff, some Beatles stuff, kind of going with, kind of an I'm the Walrus kind of vibe, I guess. Lucy in the Sky kind of vibe, I think.
And then, like, many years after I discovered the movie and them and everything, I went to see the Tom Cruise movie Vanilla Sky. And in the middle of that movie, the Porpoise song gets used. So I'm in a first.
Oh, that's right.
Sometime in whatever that came out, the 90s, early 2000s. And suddenly that is pumping through the speakers. And I'm just like, this is fantastic. So it does show up once in a while. The movie does have this following of people who really appreciate it for how strange it is and how interesting that music is. There's only, I think it's 6 songs in that movie. So the Head album
that's a ton.
Its own entity that was, I think it was put together by Jack Nicholson, who actually sort of co-wrote Head and produced Head. He put this bizarre album, which I heard back in the 80s, Rhino reissued when they did the 20th anniversary tour for the Monkees. Rhino reissued all the original 9 albums. And I bought Head before I ever had a chance to see the movie. And it's such a strange listening experience, because it is this stream of consciousness weaving of bits of dialogue and sound effects from the movie and then the songs. And it sounded creepy and dirty to me the first time I listened to that album. Some of the dialogue lifts could be misconstrued. And I'm like, what kind of movie is this? But it's a really, if you love the movie, seek out the soundtrack, because it's a very interesting oral representation of what the movie feels like. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend listening to it before you see the movie.
Yeah, definitely something that you need to get some context from the movie before you do listen to Head. Absolutely.
And that was that era where often before home video, you would see a movie in the theater and the album would be like your keepsake of that experience. And a lot of times they would weave in dialogue and things like that from the movie. And it was sort of like an audio version of a way to re-experience the film. Because Head, it came out in theaters. It died a very quick death. didn't turn up on TV until like the CBS late movie in the 70s, like a decade later, maybe. And a couple cable broadcasts, but it didn't hit home video until 86 when Rhino released, when Columbia Pictures released it to capitalize on the success of the Monkee revival.
Yeah, the first time I had seen Head was in high school. And, it was just kind of some guys wanted to watch some movies and like, oh, you've never saw Head? I was like, oh, no, I like the Monkees TV show. I didn't even really have much. I remember seeing it in a Rhino catalog, actually, on VHS, which a lot of things is where I really discovered a lot of music and things like that, where, just kind of that Rhino Records catalog.
Rhino was so amazing back in the mid to late 80s. They licensed so much stuff that the major labels didn't really have an interest in. Like they put all the Turtles albums out. They were into picture discs. They released Three Stooges material, the Monkees catalog, the Dr. Demento albums, a lot of novelty stuff. And then they had Rhino Video, where they would put out all these strange old cult movies and the kind of stuff Night Flight.
I'm a big Ed Wood fan, and that is where, certainly to find a obscure Ed Wood movie, now not so much obscure, but at the time, certainly obscure, to find those films in, a Suncoast Video.
Right.
Or something like that, just in the mall was absolutely mind-blowing to me. Like, what company in their right mind is putting out, Ed Wood movies, the Nuggets compilation, and these strange Monkees albums?
You would buy the Monkees reissues, and on the inside, they would have, on the inner sleeve, would be all ads for other Rhino albums you could get. And I remember listening to the Monkees albums and poring over all these other, and sometimes they would be photos of the album cover, and sometimes it would just be a listing of all the stuff they had. And it was just like, oh, where can I find this?
That's certainly where I heard about so many of those things. They're a tremendous company, especially in the late 90s, early 90s, 2000s, things like that. And, now when I get a record and I'm like, oh, it's a Rhino, I wonder what, if you look through that catalog, you go, oh my gosh, there's so much stuff there.
They still do these amazing, I want to say it was Rhino. They did a Woodstock 50th anniversary set that was like everything.
I believe they did. And that was actually, and also Monterey Pop. They were really big on that too. I think that they did a good reissue of that.
They were really the preeminent reissue label for a very long time. And I think they've sort of been reconfigured and folded into Atlantic Records now. And most of what they do, they still own the rights to the Monkees. So they're the ones who put out any Monkee product, but they do a lot of major label reissues for like really iconic artists and albums now. But I will forever love Rhino for what they did for the Monkees catalog, because at first it was just a greatest hits album or two, or an oddball, like the Monkey Business album from '82 that was this picture disc that had all kinds of unreleased and rare songs. And then they did the reissue of the 9 albums, and they started this Missing Link series where it was all unreleased songs, because to fuel the project, as we call it, the show, the concerts, the records back in the 60s, the guys were recording a ton of material, and it wound up being way more than ever was used on the show or the records. So there were like literally albums full of songs that nobody ever heard, or maybe were only shown in a TV episode, that started coming out in the 80s and 90s, or alternate takes or demos. And I always say, I wish every band that I love would get the treatment that Rhino gave Monkees. The Beatles don't have the kind of treatment that Rhino gave Monkees. For like box sets for every album.
And also that the fact that they kept all that stuff too. I've been watching videos about Beatles remastering, and early EMI and things like that. They were just scrapping. They were doing a stereo reissue of, maybe it was the first anthology or something like that. They needed the stereo version of I Want to Hold Your Hand, the original master. And it was just EMI just scrapped it. It was just like, oh, no, we don't need this anymore. I was like, oh my gosh, this is, I guess at the time they thought, well, we'll only need this for a year or so. But
it's amazing what survives for who and where it gets found.
Yes.
I mean,
I agree.
Look at YouTube and people will find they have Monkees acetates that are not in the hands of Rhino, that are like demos or rare alternate cuts or things like this. And it's just like, how did this just survive all these years?
Where did this come from?
I mean, this Monkees project was really not supposed to last much longer than a couple years in the 60s. And we're talking 60
No.
years later, and there are people far younger than me who are rabid about this whole thing.
One of the cool things of, kind of going back, and again, this interview may be like the Head movie where it's all over the place. One of the cool things that I found, and I go into it in a much more detail in my book. Two guys sued Screen Gems because they had brought them a similar sounding show a year earlier. It was called Liverpool, USA, about essentially the same thing. And I looked through a lot of court documents, and I really couldn't find a conclusion to it other than it was settled out of court. So it may not have been a terribly original idea. It may have been something that was stolen, or maybe just accidentally stolen. But again, something that I kind of went into it in the book, and I just always thought that was interesting, and kind of goes back to that original idea of being called Liverpool, USA. Just kind of a band kind of like the Beatles, but not.
Right. Well, that was always the criticism, is that they were just a Beatles ripoff. And it's like, well,
right.
The Beatles didn't think they were a Beatles ripoff. They thought they were more like the Marx.
No, Beatles liked them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are many photos with the individual Monkees hanging out with the Beatles in London in the 60s. It was, I think and there's an interview, the really interesting interview with Bob Rafelson, where he talks about the origins of the Monkees. Like, he had been in a traveling band back in the 50s or something like that. And he had this idea that nobody was interested in until the Beatles hit, until Help came out. And the Monkees show is much, the romps feel like Hard Day's Night. The show overall feels a bit more like Help. And which came out a year before the Monkees did. And certainly that opened a lot of eyes to, it's like Battlestar Galactica. Allegedly that idea existed before Star Wars, but it wasn't until Star Wars came out that the networks were like, what about that space show you were talking about?
Oh, we have a space movie. And the Star Trek movie did not get any real eyes on it until Star Wars came out either. Obviously the TV show had been out for a while, but Star Wars, like, oh wow, okay, well we have the Star Trek movie, let's do that.
And Boyce and Hart have said in interviews that certain Monkee songs were kind of patterned after certain Beatles songs. I can't think of what they were at the time, but there was a radio show that was done back in the 80s called the Monkees Hour, and then it was called Headquarters after that, probably because Rhino said. And we'll change the name. Like the Beatle Fest became the Fest for Beatle fans, just to not try to connote any official approval or connection. And they interviewed a lot of the people, which at the time was only 20 years past the Monkees' 60s heyday. And it was Tommy Boyce or Bobby Hart, and he had flat out said, this song we wanted to have a song that felt like such and such. So there was some of that, but their sound wasn't anything like the Beatles. Some of the songs sounded like that, but the overall, if you can even say there was an overall group sound, because if it was a Nesmith track, it kind of felt like country. If it was a Davy track, it felt a little Broadway. They were really all over the place stylistically, which I think is one of the things I find interesting about it. And what makes it so listenable to me is that it doesn't all sound like the same style from album to album, really.
And going back to, kind of Boyce and Hart, and they didn't write their own things. And again, kind of jumping all over the place. I was just thinking about it. The first time that I even heard that concept was from The Simpsons, when Marge had a Monkees. They showed her in grade school, and she had a Monkees lunchbox. And somebody said, there's something about the Beatles. And then they said, they don't even write their own music. And I was like, they don't? Like, I remember watching this as a kid going, that's interesting. I didn't know that, so it's kind of interesting how, again, Monkees kind of have seeped into pop culture more than we think.
It's always funny to see a reference, because I've been so seriously into it since I was young, especially since '86, but even before that I have no concept of what the rest of the world thinks other than what I hear here and there. Like, I don't know how many people know them, how many people know the music or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You talk about not writing their own music. A lot of bands didn't. Elvis never wrote a song.
Yeah, Elvis never did. Well, Elvis's name was on it, though.
Yeah, that's true. That savvy, if we can get a little of the publishing, let's just let's slip some bills in somebody's direction so we can get his name on that. Yeah, that's a whole other show in discussion. So you mentioned the lunchbox. One of the interesting things about this too was the merchandising. I've got a book it's all just photos of Monkees merchandise from the 60s, and it was everything from lunchboxes to boots to clothing. The More of the Monkees album is them wearing clothes from the Monkees line at JCPenney. which apparently they weren't thrilled about that album coming out with them in clothes they thought was pretty square. There were, plastic guitars, Monkee Mobile models, the little mini Monkees dolls, all that stuff. There was so much of it that, I was never really lucky enough to find any, aside from some of the books. Like there's this book called Who's Got the Button that came out in the 60s, like a hardcover Whitman book and some paperbacks. But it was like the Beatles in that anything you could slap their name on, somebody did, down to marketing these Monkees soda clubs. Did you come across that in your?
Never heard of that.
It was a Monkees branded. They were like teen clubs. So instead of a place where people would go and knock back the hooch, it would be kids going and local bands would play, and it would be Monkee branded. And there were a couple of them.
Oh.
There was one in New York or New Jersey I've seen ads for. I mean, just strange to me that all these bizarre ideas, any way anybody could make a buck off this logo or this phenomenon in that amount of time.
They did it.
It certainly did.
Yeah, certainly at the height of advertising, of merchandising, where it was like, key, where you had shows like the Monkees, you had Batman, where it's like, hey, whatever we could find, we're slapping the name on it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with a lot of different things and a lot of different countries, like in the Monkees. This past weekend, I was at a horror movie convention in Pittsburgh, and there was a guy that had monsters and monkey stuff. Those kind of the two things that he had, and two great shows. And he had these rare Japanese presses of Monkee records and European presses. So, again, Monkees kind of went all over too.
They played around the world. And I know there was a big resurgence in Japan in the early 80s because Daydream Believer was used in a Kodak commercial. And it was 80, 81, and they became phenomenally successful. They reissued all the albums, and the guys individually, Davey, Mickey, and Peter all went over there and did live shows, toured, did really well. I think Davey and Mickey put out, and Peter, I think all three, put out like a single release over there, 45, and did really well. There's a label called 7A Records now that's reissuing all kinds of rare solo Monkee stuff from over the years. And they're putting all this stuff out. So you can now get like a DVD of these shows, seeing the, Mickey by himself with an all Japanese backing band in 1981 doing his single, To Be or Not to Be. It's wild how, for the amount of time I've been alive, it just keeps coming back. Something keeps bringing it back. Yeah. They're just being done on MeTV.
And sometimes unfortunate things like the new Monkees.
Yeah, but I was going to mention that earlier, where it's this thing that worked so perfectly in its time, and it's been attempted since then, and it never really works. I think it never
works again. Yeah, the new Monkees just never worked. I tried watching a couple episodes, and I was, this is.
Everything has its fans. I've been rather shocked in the Monkeyverse of late that the people who are like suddenly really big new Monkees fans. I remember one of their songs in the show. I watched it once or twice, like with furrowed brow and crossed arms, because I was like, this is something else. And that was probably what they were doomed by. Is the new? Come on,
Mickey Dolenz did do some songs with the new Monkees later. There was kind of full circle Monkees.
Apparently, when the new Monkees were recording their album, they did it at the same studio the Monkees were recording their Pool It album in 1987, their big reunion record. And I think there wasn't a lot of friendly handshakes at the time, from what I've heard. But yeah, they've all sort of made peace now. There's a great podcast called Zilch, which is the Big Monkees podcast, where they've interviewed one or more of the new Monkees. And it's very interesting to hear what their experience was, because these guys were just like young actors and musicians thrilled to get this sweet gig, and just the hate that was piled upon them, and the fact that nobody would give them the time of day because, ladies and gentlemen, it's the new Rolling Stones. What a bad idea. It was.
I think if they tried calling them anything else, it probably would have worked a little bit better.
It very much might have. It's never worked again. And boy, those old songs are still good. I went to the last tour that Mickey and Mike did. I went to 2 shows, and those shows were sold out. And the age range was little kids to old people. It was pretty amazing to witness.
Will always survive.
So thank you once again for joining us, Thom. Your book is Primetime 1966 to 1967, the full spectrum of television's first all-color season. And in that book, you go into like deep detail for like every show that was on TV at that time, right?
Yes, every show, as deep as I could possibly get with it. Certainly other shows more than some. So obviously Batman, the Monkees, which have, a lot of history behind it. And pop culture, a very deep dive. So if you are a Monkees fan, if you're a Star Trek fan, if you're a Batman fan, this is the book for you. And at the drive-in, it was right before Father's Day when we talked about Batman. And I kept pushing, hey, it makes a great Father's Day gift. That seemed to sell books. So I'm going with it. I don't know what the next holiday. It makes a great Labor Day gift.
Because you're going to be with us at the drive-in on August 14th for our Monkees show, selling and signing copies of the book, which is when I'll finally get my copy. And we'll have to figure out whatever the closest holiday is. It makes a great Secretary's Day gift.
Absolutely.
For Arbor Day, this book was once a tree. Celebrate trees with Primetime 66.
Johnny Appleseed Day.
We'll make it work. As we said, we will be seeing Thom at the Mahoning Drive-In. We hope we will be seeing you at the Mahoning Drive-In on Sunday, August 14th for Mahoning Monkee Mania. That is 2 35mm episodes on the big screen. They were never meant to be seen this big, but we're going to love it and sing and dance along. We're going to have Head on 35mm and an all Monkees DJ set with hits and deep cuts. Monkees merch raffle. It's going to be like a little mini convention. So we hope you all will come on out. Tickets available now online at mahoningdit.com.
Well, that's incredible. Yeah.
Can't wait to see you in person. I missed the Batman show, so I'm looking forward to meeting and chatting about all this stuff in person. And we hope to have you again on this podcast. I'd like to welcome Derek Miner to Mahoning Drive-In Radio. Derek is a friend of the Monkees at large. Which is not to say that he's wanted by the law or anything. He's the person who is providing us with these rare 35mm prints of several Monkees episodes. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you, Mark.
I've heard you on other podcasts, and I'm not going to go as deep into what I want to talk about in this as I normally would, because I think you covered it really well. I listened to you in the Monkeying Around podcast talk about how you got into the monkey world and all that. And I feel like did you do another podcast with Craig?
Yeah, I've been on some Pods and Sods podcasts with Craig a few times. Yeah.
Well, I contacted you because I knew that there were these 35mm prints rolling around out there. And it was just fascinating to me that there would be 35mm prints of a TV show in the first place. These were intended to be shown on TV, not in theaters. And that, they were in the hands of a private collector. So how did these prints of these Monkee episodes come into your possession?
Well, the short answer is that the prints that I own were part of Andrew Sandoval's collection. And he had done some of the legwork over the years of looking for some of these prints. Andrew, as many people know, has done an amazing job on the Monkees history and done a lot of work on his books that he's published about their history, and he's always digging up new and unusual material. And one of the big kudos I have for him is that he's put his own money into collecting items that have gone on to be released on CD and Blu-ray. The Blu-ray set contains a lot of material that would only be on that set because Andrew owned those items and had them transferred. And
for people who don't know who Andrew Sandoval is, if there are 1 or 2 or 100 non-Monkee fans listening to this podcast,
that's true.
I don't want to leave anybody out. Andrew has been involved with the Monkees through Rhino Records for, dare I say, decades at this point.
Yes.
As the archivist of the music, producing the reissues. He was the road manager, their manager, for the last several Monkees tours. He's been the man who's really kept the Monkees alive for the last 20 plus years. And he's probably attained sainthood in the world of Monkee fans, because were it not for this guy, we wouldn't have this treasure trove of really high quality releases, be it books, records, CDs.
Exactly. And I mean, Andrew is a consummate historian and archivist. In addition to his work on Monkees materials, I mean, he's done work on the Everly Brothers materials, the Kinks, and he got started in the early 90s. And I'd seen his name on many, many, many projects that were just fascinating. Anyone who's into 60s music would have something in their collection, most likely, that Andrew worked on. And so, as part of his work on Monkees projects over the years, he'd been out looking for some of these film prints. As I go into in a video that I put on YouTube, it's on my channel called Cutout Bin. I kind of say they're the lost Monkees episodes. There was a period where at the tail end of the original Monkees phenomenon in the late 60s, going into 1970, they show went into reruns on CBS and ABC for a few years. And they decided that they wanted to update the image of the Monkees and put different songs in the shows. So they went back in and made new versions of these shows with songs from those last two albums and a handful of unreleased songs. The interesting thing about those is that they haven't turned up in total. A few of them have turned up in places. A couple of them were part of like the package that MTV ran in the 80s, and a couple of them have come out on home video. But in general, they were just kind of like lost time. They weren't the original versions of the shows with the songs that everybody knew. Now, the interesting thing is I'm not as big a historian on all television shows. I have a background a little bit in film and TV production, but I'm not aware of like how big the market is for collectors collecting TV episodes on 35 millimeter. I've heard a lot about people who have episodes on 16 millimeter, and I'm just not aware of like how many other shows had prints kind of go off into the collector's market. But it seems like the ones that have turned up are these ones from that early 70s run where they were on CBS and mostly on ABC are the ones that I've seen turn up. And I'm not sure why that might particularly be. They might have like, someone might have liberated him from a vault, or they might have had a different way of handling them once they aired. But for some reason or other, they never returned to the original distributor and ended up in the collector's market. And so over the years, Andrew obtained 8 prints, and about 4 or 5 of them had material that he scanned and put on the Blu-ray set that came out a few years ago of all of the original Monkees episodes in HD. And for various reasons, only excerpts of them were shown. They took the excerpts of the different songs and put them on that set. There wasn't really any place to see this version of the episode in full. It was just an extra on the disc. So when he was going through a period of putting up a lot of his collection online for sale, it was just a few different things here and there that were like posters or memorabilia from the Rhino days or something like that. But then one day I saw that he put up 2 of his prints, and I said, hey, what would you say to selling all of them in one go? Like, how many do you have? I have 8. How about a package deal for all of them? Because I really wanted to go through the effort of getting all of them in full on some digital format, some format where I could have the whole thing. Right. And so I just made a deal with him to get all 8 of them. It's the only film that I own. It's the only, well, I own a few other little trailers, but I mean, this is the most extensive of the collection I have. So I have these 8 episodes from that 70s run, and they're in, different levels of fading and stuff like that. But I knew what they would be like in some way, because for the 40th anniversary of Head, I'm trying to remember now if it's the 30th or the 40th anniversary, there was an anniversary screening that Andrew Sandoval did in Los Angeles at the Egyptian Theater, and they showed it's very similar to what we're going to do. It's
funny enough, yeah, that's what gave me the idea to do this show. Actually, there you
go.
I knew they existed because I had seen a lot of online promo and reporting about that event, and that's what blew my mind at the idea that they were ever on the 35 millimeter, let alone still in somebody's hands.
Right. And so I was living in Florida, and I heard they were going to do this, and I was like, I've got to go. Because not only had I wanted to see, I'm a movie person, I'm a 35 millimeter person, I just love, I did projection as not at union level, like really good, well-paid, highly trained people, but down in the non-union states, they'll throw the guy who serves popcorn up in the booth.
Oh, excellent.
So I got to run some 35 millimeter prints in my day. So I was excited that they was going to have this screening, and he was going to show Head on a 35 millimeter print that Rhino had created. And he was going to show us a couple of these episodes that he had. I didn't know what to expect for those. I just knew that they had song substitutions. They had alternate songs in them. And the thing that really struck me, and I'm reminded of this again when I watched the scans that I got from the post house where I had the films transferred, that even though there's color fading, they look incredibly sharp. They are incredibly nice looking. The quality of it really shines, and it's amazing. I would dare say that I don't know why Head overall has kind of a soft or overly reprinted look. I don't know, but the episodes, the clarity of the episodes, I think, is beyond what's in the film, strangely enough, the motion picture that was made for theaters. But these episodes, they do look great projected, so that was really nice. And so just the fact that I knew they existed, Andrew had them, I happened to catch that he was selling them, and I just bought them in a whole lot. Got them all at once and got them all transferred. So I'm met that goal of just capturing them for whatever the future, because not everything that he had was on the Blu-ray set. So there's a couple of these episodes that just weren't captured that way. And there's still other ones in that series that were running on the 70s, CBS and ABC, that haven't really turned up. Supposedly they're in a couple other countries, some of them have been in Japan on Laserdisc. And so I keep hoping that someday other recordings, either film prints or recordings from television in other places, will turn up, or at the very least that somebody has like maybe just an audio recording of what it was on the air, so that we'd hear what it sounded like for that song to be cut into the show in its spliced up, chopped up version, because the songs are all different lengths, so you got to find some way to shoehorn it into a place where another song was.
What's interesting too is that since we advertised this show, somebody commented on one of the posts I made somewhere, "Oh, I've got an episode that's not one of the ones that you already had or that we were planning to show. We have another episode from another source. Our friends at Exhumed Films have Card Carrying Red Shoes on 35 with all these tend to seem to have all the commercials, or a lot of commercials intact too.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting. So in, you and I, since we started talking about this, these other episodes have started showing up. So hopefully maybe this event will shine a light on this for other collectors, because the people in the 35 collector community tend to know what each other has and be very interested when other things pop up. So I'm hoping that more will turn up, and that maybe if this event does well enough, I keep telling people, I hate to say if it does well enough, because that might, we do it again, because then some people just think in their heads, well, they're going to do it again. There's no guarantee we're going to do it again. It has to do well. But I keep saying, if we can do this again, I know some people with more episodes that we could play in front of Head. So I'm really hoping, selfishly, I would love to see everything you have on our big screen and the other episodes that keep showing up on the big screen. I'm fascinated. I'm going to guess these were the network prints. I know the print that we have access to local to us, on the leader, it says the air date on it, the day it was supposed to air. So somehow all these network prints got released into the wild with commercials intact. I mean, the Card Carrying Red Shoes that we have has a Schoolhouse Rock at the end of it. So even has commercials like after the episode was over. It's just fascinating to me that what you mentioned, 16 millimeter, my presumption was always that the syndication prints were all 16. What I was watching on Channel 56 in Boston as a little kid was a 16 print. The fact that, 35, I don't know, it just blows my mind.
I really am excited about bringing these out to a place that will show 35 millimeter film, to have this projected. As I mentioned, like I've been in the booth as a projectionist a little bit, but like drive-ins fascinated me early on. Like the first or second experience I had going to the movies when I was like 3 or 4 years old was going to a drive-in, and I had a double feature of 101 Dalmatians and Herbie Goes Bananas.
Nice. I saw Herbie Goes Bananas at the drive-in when I was a kid. I wonder if it was the same double feature. That's really interesting.
It is. It's like, I think because like Disney probably programmed that same double feature everywhere. Yeah, that was like the idea probably. After that, I was all about like, play in my backyard, pretending I was like going to the drive-in or something. But I loved the movies too, and I've always found ways to kind of work it in as a hobby, and when I was like looking for like extra work or something, I would go work at a movie theater. So movies, especially the way they were like when I was young, that you had to get the prints and you had to thread them up and everything, just fascinate me. I just love it.
One thing I wanted to mention about these Monkees prints that you have that we're going to show on August 14th is that they've probably only seen the light of a theatrical projector once, maybe twice before we're showing them. So these like have kind of almost never been seen on a movie screen before, let alone the 100+ foot size. Maybe I can go out and say they've never been shown on a screen as big as they will be at Mahoning Monkee Mania. That's a huge screen. So it's like being a kid again when you would sit low under your TV like the old Looney Tunes. It's going to replicate that, because you're going to be sitting like under the biggest TV you can imagine and see all the details of what was on the walls in that apartment. And I can't wait. Like this may be one of those shows. I always say when they play one of my favorite movies, I want to get as close to the screen as I can without it being distorted looking up at it, just so there's nothing between me and that thing that I love. And I might wind up doing that for this show.
Yeah. Like I said, there's some color fade, but they still look sharp. They look great. And it is a whole different experience seeing it that large. I mean, I was just rewatching some of the material on the Blu-rays, and the jump to HD for some of those is just interesting enough that you kind of look at it differently. But I mean, I've only got like a 55-inch TV, it would look totally different and give you a whole different visual perspective to see it on a screen projected that large. Yeah, for sure.
I've found too, like movies that I've watched a million times on TV, seeing them in the theater it really freshens them up. So if you've seen these episodes a million times or head a million times, and I'm not just saying this to sell tickets, because it's what I found. Like I remember Airplane was one of the first movies I taped from HBO when I got a VCR in the late 80s, and I watched it endlessly. And Dartmouth Film Society, I lived relatively close to Dartmouth at the time, ran it on film, and it was like seeing it for the first time. There was so much subtlety that's missed on TV and facial expressions and things like that. And that's why, again, I've watched these episodes endlessly. I annoy the hell out of my girlfriend by anything we watch. I'll be like, I was on the Monkees once. She was on the Monkees once. He was on the Monkees. She's like, yes, great. So like, I know this stuff. So I'm really excited at how fresh these episodes in that movie are going to feel. And Head is such a dense experience anyway. It always feels fresh because there's just so much packed into it. I've only seen it on the big screen once in Boston long ago. And again, nowhere near the size screen that we have. So I'm super excited. And you're going to be coming up for this. So we bring Prince up.
Yes. I'm taking that opportunity to actually hand deliver you the Prince and bring some memorabilia and some stuff like that up to the show as well, just because I want to be part of that experience of watching these. It's totally worth the trip for me just for that, to be part of the experience.
We appreciate it. I personally appreciate your involvement in this so much. And this show, I'm putting this on. I'm not going to say I'm just putting it on for me, but in the grander scheme, I'm putting it on for people like us. I'm putting the kind of show on that I would want to pay and travel to go to. And who knows if we'll ever be able to do this again. So I want to make it as much fun as possible. I want to make it worth your drive and anybody's drive who comes out. And to you and anybody who comes out, you can come into the projection booth. We're fairly unique. Literally an open door policy. The projection booth opens up into the snack bar. So you can walk in, see the projectors. I tell people if you want to hold a reel of what we're showing and get a photo with it, you can do that. If you want to take pictures with the projectors, they're vintage, the 1947 Simplex E7 projectors that have been there since we opened in 49.
Wow.
They still work. They're still running. They're still running. And it's fabulous. And people love it. Like the projection booth is like this sacred kind of forbidden area in most theaters. In most theaters, they're just not accessible, period, because they're up a staircase or a ladder. Or a friend of mine ran a theater in Ohio that was a very old theater. And the way the projectionists got to the booth, there was a utility closet that had a metal ladder coming down.
Oh my God.
Ceiling. So yeah, we'll talk about ADA compliant. So you had to climb a ladder up into the ceiling to get into the projection booth. So we're the opposite of that. Wheelchair accessible. We're like right off the main snack bar. And we love that people can come in and look, because it's an opportunity most people don't have.
Yeah.
It's a nice memory. We love showing it to kids. We have a ton of trailers that have been donated to us over the years that we have like on a roll, almost like a roll of paper towel. We cut off a strip and give it to kids for bookmarks so they can see frames of film. Kids of any age, really.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's going to be a lot of fun. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, Derek. I thank you so much for coming on Mahoning Drive-In Radio. And I thank you even more for providing those rare 1973 rerun Monkees episodes that we'll be showing at the Mahoning Monkee Mania show on August 14th. So how can people contact you or get in on the search for Lost Monkees Media? How do we find you online?
The best place to go, we have a Facebook group called Mixing Links, the Monkees on Disc. And that's grown out of a project that I have worked on for a while with my friend Craig Smith. We both were fascinated with the variations of the music that was released over the years, different mixes, different releases of the Monkees material. And so like part of our life's work is just making sense of all that. And then Andrew Sandoval just keeps adding more and more and more.
Every time there was a re-release or a reissue, it would be like, here's a song with 3 more seconds of fade, or the maracas are louder in this one. And it was like,
exactly.
It was joyous, a little bit maddening to be like, I have to get that Arista CD from 1986 now.
Yes. And that's what we're here for. That Craig and I with Mixing Links, that is what we are here for, to help make sense all of those variations, so you know where to find them. So we have the Mixing Links group on Facebook, and I created the cutout one word bin, separate word, on YouTube, and that is where I posted the Lost Media search for the Lost Monkees episodes video, and I created a Lost Monkees at gmail.com address for people to send leads if they have them. So that's where people can find me online and take part in our glorious monkey madness.
Excellent. And then they can find you if they need to track you down with like a summons or something like that. They would find you at the Mahoning Drive-In on August 14th. That's excellent. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for having me. It has been a blast. I love talking about this stuff. Just film in general, not just Monkees. It's like great stuff.
It is our passion. It's what we do. Until next time, we will see you at the drive-in.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night and God bless you.